The desert wind carried the scent of sage and something else, something that made Ayana's blood run cold. She crouched behind the weathered boulder, her dark eyes scanning the canyon below where her people had made camp for the night. The horses were restless, snorting and pawing at the rocky ground, their ears pricked forward in alarm. Something was wrong. Ayana had learned to trust her instincts long ago. At 19, she was already known among her Apache band as Tsayeta Helani, the one who sees in shadows. Her grandmother had taught her the old ways, how to read the whispers of the wind and the language of the animals. Tonight, every fiber of her being screamed danger. She was right to be afraid. The attack came swift and merciless, like a thunderclap in clear skies. Armed men on horseback burst from the narrow canyon mouth, their faces hidden behind bandanas, their guns blazing orange fire in the gathering dusk. Ayana's people scattered like startled deer, but the raiders had chosen their moment well. The camp was trapped between steep canyon walls with only one way out, and that way was blocked. Ayana pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. She recognized the leader immediately. Lucas "Black Jack" Morrison, a name whispered in saloons from Santa Fe to Tucson. His reputation preceded him like the stench of death, a man who dealt in human misery, trading Apache captives to the highest bidder. Some said he sold them to work in the silver mines of Mexico. Others whispered darker rumors. Black Jack's cold gray eyes swept the chaos below, searching. Ayana knew with sickening certainty that he was looking for her specifically. Word had reached him somehow about the young Apache woman who could track like a ghost and fight like a cornered wildcat. Men like Morrison collected beautiful, skilled women like trophies, or livestock. "Take the girl alive." Morrison's voice cut through the gunfire. "The rest don't matter." Ayana's blood turned to ice water. They were here for her. But how had they known where to find her people? The band had been careful, avoiding the main trails, camping in hidden places known only to. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Nailnish, her cousin, who had been acting strangely for weeks, disappearing for hours at a time, returning with vague explanations and coins that caught the firelight. He must have been feeding information to Morrison's gang, leading them straight to the camp. She spotted Nailnish now, crouched behind an overturned supply wagon, his face twisted with what might have been guilt or fear. Their eyes met across the chaos, and in that instant, she saw the truth confirmed in his expression. He had sold out his own people, sold out her, for silver pieces. The shooting was already dying down. Morrison's men were professionals. They had swept through the camp like a scythe through wheat. Most of her people had escaped into the maze of arroyos that spider-webbed through the canyon system, but several lay still in the dust, their blood darkening the rocky soil. "Fan out," Morrison barked. "She's got to be here somewhere." Ayana knew she had perhaps minutes before they found her hiding place. The boulder that concealed her was large, but not large enough to hide her forever. She could try to run deeper into the canyon system, but Morrison's men would be expecting that. They probably had the main escape routes watched. That left only one option: up. The canyon wall behind her rose nearly vertical for 30 feet before leveling out into a narrow ledge that ran along the cliff face. It was a climb that would challenge even an experienced mountaineer, but Ayana had been scaling these rocks since she could walk. Her grandmother used to say she was half mountain goat. She began to climb, her fingers finding purchase on tiny ledges and cracks in the sandstone. Below her, she could hear Morrison's men getting closer, their voices echoing off the canyon walls. Her muscles burned with the effort, but she forced herself to move silently, knowing that even a single dislodged pebble could give her away. Halfway up the wall, disaster struck. Her hand closed on what seemed like solid rock, but the sandstone crumbled under her weight. She slipped, scrabbling desperately for a handhold as loose rocks clattered down into the canyon below. "Up there!" someone shouted. "I saw movement on the cliff." Gunfire erupted, bullets sparking off the rock face around her. Ayana pressed herself flat against the stone, chips of sandstone stinging her face as the shots went wide in the poor light. She was completely exposed, halfway between the canyon floor and the ledge above, with nowhere to run. "Don't kill her, you idiots!" Morrison's voice roared over the gunfire. "I need her alive." The shooting stopped, but Ayana knew it was only temporary. Morrison's men would be positioning themselves for a better shot, or planning to climb up after her. She resumed her desperate ascent, her hands slick with sweat and blood from the sharp rock. She made it to the ledge just as the first of Morrison's men reached the base of the cliff below. The ledge was barely 3 feet wide, running along the canyon wall like a natural walkway. To her left, it curved around a bend in the cliff face and disappeared from view. To her right, it ended in a sheer drop. Left was her only option. Ayanna ran along the narrow ledge, her moccasined feet sure and silent on the stone. Behind her, she could hear the scrape and curse of men attempting to follow her up the cliff face. Morrison's voice echoed off the canyon walls, alternately encouraging and threatening his men. The ledge curved around the bend, and Ayanna found herself looking out over a different canyon, this one even deeper and more rugged than the first. The ledge continued for perhaps 50 yards before ending at what looked like the entrance to a cave. It wasn't much, but it might provide temporary shelter. She had made it perhaps halfway to the cave when the ledge began to crumble beneath her feet. The sandstone was old and weathered, weakened by countless seasons of freeze and thaw. Her weight was just enough to trigger a small avalanche of loose rock. Ayanna threw herself forward as the ledge collapsed behind her, landing hard on her stomach on the remaining solid stone. Her legs dangled over empty space, and below her yawned a drop of at least 200 feet to the canyon floor. She clawed at the rock, her fingers finding precious little purchase on the smooth stone. Her strength was fading fast, and she could feel her grip beginning to slip. This was how she would die, not with a bullet from Morrison's gun, but broken on the rocks far below. That's when she heard the voice. "Easy there, miss. Don't move." The voice was deep and gravelly, with an accent she couldn't quite place, maybe Montana or the Dakotas. Definitely not local. Ayanna craned her neck upward and found herself staring into the most startling blue eyes she had ever seen. They belonged to a man crouched on the solid portion of the ledge above her, one massive hand already reaching down toward her. He was unlike any man she had ever seen. Tall and powerfully built, with shoulder-length hair the color of winter wheat and a beard to match. His skin was deeply tanned and weathered by years of mountain sun and wind. He wore buckskins that had seen hard use, and a battered hat that had probably been brown once but was now the color of old leather. Most striking of all was the complete absence of fear in his expression. While she dangled over certain death, he looked as calm as if he were reaching down to help her out of a shallow creek. "Can you grab my wrist?" he asked, his voice steady and reassuring. Ayanna managed to get one hand around his thick wrist. His grip was like iron, warm and completely steady. With his help, she managed to get her other hand up, and then he was hauling her up onto the solid rock with effortless strength. She lay gasping on the ledge, her heart still hammering from the near fall. The stranger crouched beside her, giving her a moment to recover while his strange blue eyes scanned the canyon below. From this angle, she could see he wore a long knife on his belt and carried what looked like a sharp's rifle across his back. "You hurt?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Ayanna shook her head, not trusting her voice yet. She pushed herself up to a sitting position and really looked at the man who had saved her life. He was older than she had first thought, probably in his 40s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into mountain distances. But there was something ageless about him too, a sense of weathered permanence like an old tree that had survived countless storms. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper. "Name's Caleb McKenna," he said simply. "Been watching the trouble down in the canyon. Figured you might could use some help." Before she could respond, Morrison's voice echoed up from the canyon below, distorted by the rock walls but still clearly audible. "She's up there somewhere. Find another way around. I want that Apache bitch alive." Caleb's expression darkened at the crude language, his jaw tightening. "Friend of yours?" he asked dryly. "Black Jack Morrison," Ayanna spat. "He killed my people. Burned our camp. He's a slave trader." Caleb nodded grimly. "Heard of him. Been meaning to have a conversation with that particular gentleman for some time now." His tone was conversational, but there was something in his eyes that made Ayanna think Morrison might not enjoy that conversation very much. "We need to get out of here," she said. "His men will find another way up." "Already thought of that." Caleb stood and offered her his hand. Cave up ahead connects to a whole network of passages. Been using them for years. Morrison's boys will never find us in there. Ayanna took his offered hand and let him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked with his hands and wasn't afraid of hard labor. She found herself oddly reluctant to let go. The cave entrance was larger than it had appeared from a distance, tall enough for even Caleb to walk upright. Just inside the entrance, the passage split into 3 different tunnels. Caleb led her confidently into the middle passage, pulling a torch from somewhere in the darkness and lighting it with a match struck against the cave wall. "How do you know these caves so well?" Ayanna asked as they moved deeper into the mountain. "Been living up here for nigh on 15 years, Caleb said. "Know every passage, every dead end, every way in and out. These mountains are my home." The passage they followed wound deeper into the mountain, sometimes so narrow they had to walk single file, sometimes opening into chambers large enough to hold a small house. The air was cool and still, carrying the mineral smell of deep rock and underground water. Somewhere in the distance, Ayanna could hear the sound of running water. "Why?" she asked suddenly. Caleb glanced back at her. "Why what? Why do you live alone in the mountains? Most white men want to be around other white men. Towns, settlements, civilization." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, the only sound their footsteps echoing in the passage. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "Had a family once. Wife, 2 little girls. Lived on a ranch up in Colorado Territory. Raiders hit us while I was away hunting. Cheyenne, the army claimed, but I never believed that. Cheyenne wouldn't have done what was done there." Ayanna's heart clenched. She had seen enough of white man's justice to know how these stories usually went. "You went looking for revenge. Spent 3 years tracking the men who did it. Found them too." His voice was flat, emotionless. Turned out it was a gang of white men dressed like Indians, trying to stir up trouble between the army and the tribes. Wanted to start a war so they could get rich selling supplies to both sides. "What did you do?" "What needed doing?" The finality in his tone told her not to ask for details. "But when it was over, I realized I didn't much care for the company of civilized folks anymore. So I came here. Been here ever since." They emerged into a large chamber lit by shafts of moonlight filtering down through cracks in the ceiling. The sound of water was much louder here, and Ayanna could see a stream running along one wall of the chamber, disappearing into another passage. But what caught her attention was the evidence of long habitation, a neat pile of firewood, shelves carved into the rock walls, bundles of dried meat and other supplies. "This is where you live?" she asked, amazed. "One of the places." Caleb set the torch in a holder carved into the wall. "Got several camps scattered through these mountains. Never like to stay in one place too long. Makes a man predictable, and predictable men don't live long out here." Ayanna walked to the stream and knelt beside it, cupping the cold, clear water in her hands to drink. The water tasted of minerals and mountain snow, clean and pure. She splashed some on her face, washing away the dust and fear of the evening. "You're safe here," Caleb said quietly. "Morrison and his boys will never find this place." "For now," Ayanna agreed. "But I can't stay here forever. I have to find my people, make sure they're safe." "Your people are fine," Caleb said. "Watched them slip away during the attack. They're probably halfway to the Chiricahuas by now. Apache know how to disappear when they need to." Ayanna felt a wave of relief wash over her. Her grandmother, her younger brother, the children, they had escaped. But the relief was quickly followed by a cold realization. "Then I'm alone." "Not alone," Caleb said simply. "You're here with me." There was something in the way he said it that made Ayanna look at him more carefully. In the flickering torchlight, his weathered face was kind but guarded, as if he were afraid to hope for something he had lost long ago. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "I'm Apache. Your people and mine. We're not exactly friends." Caleb snorted. "My people? Miss, I stopped having people the day I found my family butchered in our own home. Far as I'm concerned, There's only two kinds of folks in this world, decent ones and bastards. And you're clearly one of the decent ones. Before Ayanna could respond, a sound echoed through the cave system. Distant voices, muffled by rock and distance but definitely human. Morrison's men had found the cave entrance. Caleb was already moving, grabbing his rifle and checking the load. They're persistent, I'll give them that, he said grimly. But they don't know these caves like I do. Come on. He led her to the far side of the chamber where another passage opened, this one sloping upward. As they climbed, the voices behind them grew fainter but didn't disappear entirely. Morrison's gang was methodically searching the cave system. How many men does he have? Caleb asked as they climbed. I counted 8 during the attack, Ayanna replied. Maybe more waiting with the horses. 8's a lot, but manageable. These caves give us the advantage. They can only come at us a few at a time, and they don't know the layout. The passage leveled out and opened into another chamber, this one smaller than the first. Caleb went immediately to what looked like a pile of rocks against one wall, but when he moved them aside, Ayanna saw they had been concealing a cache of weapons, rifles, ammunition, and something that made her eyes widen. Dynamite. You planning to blow up the mountain? She asked. Caleb grinned, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely happy. Not the whole mountain. Just enough to convince Morrison and his boys that this particular hunt ain't worth the trouble. He selected 2 sticks of dynamite and a coil of fuse, checking them carefully in the torchlight. There's a narrow section about 50 yards back toward the entrance. Perfect spot for a little rockfall. Won't hurt anyone if they're not stupid enough to be standing right underneath it, but it'll block the passage pretty thoroughly. And if they are standing underneath it? Caleb's grin turned cold. Then Morrison's going to need new men. They made their way back through the passages, moving carefully and quietly. The voices were much clearer now. Morrison's men had split up and were exploring different tunnels. Ayanna could hear at least 3 different voices, maybe 4, all relatively close. Caleb found the spot he was looking for, a section where the passage narrowed and the ceiling was held up by what looked like a natural stone arch. He placed the dynamite carefully, running the fuse back around a bend in the passage where they would be safe from the blast. How long? Ayanna whispered. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Caleb struck a match and held it to the fuse. The cord began to burn with a steady hiss, the spark moving slowly but inevitably toward the dynamite. They retreated around the bend and waited. The voices were very close now, close enough that Ayanna could make out individual words. Seen tracks in the dust here. Passage goes deeper. Boss wants her alive, remember? Then the explosion came. The sound was deafening in the confined space, a thunder that seemed to shake the entire mountain. Dust and debris filled the air, and somewhere ahead of them, men were screaming, not in pain, but in surprise and terror as tons of rock came crashing down. When the echoes finally faded, there was silence. Caleb and Ayanna made their way back to the site of the explosion, covering their faces against the dust that still hung thick in the air. The passage was completely blocked by fallen stone. It would take a crew of miners with proper equipment days to clear it. That should give Morrison something to think about, Caleb said with satisfaction. But as they made their way back to the main chamber, Ayanna realized their problems were far from over. Morrison might not be able to reach them through the caves, but he could simply wait them out. These mountains had only so many ways down, and a man like Morrison would have the patience and resources to watch them all. He'll post men at every trail, she said, voicing her thoughts. We're trapped. Maybe, Caleb agreed. But Morrison doesn't know these mountains like I do. There are ways out he's never even dreamed of. Over the next 3 days, Caleb proved his words true. He led Ayanna through passages she would never have suspected existed, some of them so narrow they had to crawl on their hands and knees, others opening into vast underground chambers decorated with formations that looked like frozen waterfalls. They emerged twice to scout Morrison's positions. The outlaw leader had indeed posted sentries on all the obvious trails, and his main camp was positioned to watch the primary approaches to the mountain. But Caleb seemed unconcerned. Man thinks like a soldier, he observed after their second scouting trip. Posts guards on roads and passes, same way the army would. But these mountains don't care about roads. On the fourth morning, Caleb shook Ayanna awake before dawn. "Time to go," he said simply. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, gathering the few possessions she had. Caleb had insisted on giving her better clothes, a shirt and pants that had belonged to someone smaller than him, probably traded from Mexican vaqueros. They fit her well enough, and were certainly more practical than her traditional dress for mountain climbing. He led her through passages she hadn't seen before, always climbing higher into the mountain. The air grew thinner and colder as they ascended, and she realized they were approaching the actual peak of the mountain. They emerged onto a narrow ledge just as the sun was rising, painting the desert below in shades of gold and red. The view was spectacular. She could see for miles in every direction, the desert stretching away like a vast, rumpled blanket. Far below, she could make out Morrison's camp, the men looking like ants from this height. "How do we get down from here?" she asked. Caleb pointed to what looked like a sheer cliff face. But as Ayanna looked more closely, she could see he was indicating a series of handholds and narrow ledges that zigzagged down the mountain face, a route that would be invisible to anyone watching from below. "Old Mescalero hunting trail," he explained. "Haven't been used in 50 years, maybe more. Rough going, but it'll get us down the backside of the mountain where Morrison's got no eyes." The descent took most of the day. Several times, Ayanna was certain they would both fall to their deaths, but Caleb moved with the confidence of a man who had made this climb many times before. When they finally reached the bottom, they were miles from Morrison's camp, in a hidden canyon that showed no sign of recent human presence. "Now what?" Ayanna asked. "Now we get you back to your people," Caleb said. "Got a pretty good idea where they'll have gone to ground." But as they made their way through the canyon, heading toward what Caleb claimed was an old Apache stronghold in the Chiricahua Mountains, Ayanna found herself reluctant to reach their destination. These days with Caleb had been different, peaceful, despite the danger. She had never met a white man who treated her as an equal, who listened to her thoughts and opinions without condescension or dismissal. And there was something else, something she was almost afraid to acknowledge. She was attracted to this strange mountain man who lived alone in the high places. Not just physically, though his strength and competence were certainly appealing. There was something about his gentleness, his quiet dignity, that drew her like a moth to flame. They made camp that evening in a sheltered grove beside a clear mountain stream. Caleb caught trout with his hands, while Ayanna gathered edible plants and roots. As they shared their simple meal beside a small fire, she found herself studying his face in the flickering light. "What will you do?" she asked. "After you take me to my people?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Go back to the mountains, I suppose. It's what I know. Alone. Always alone." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself. "I mean, you don't have to be. You could. There are other choices." Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip. But when he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "Apache woman and a white mountain man? That's not a path that leads anywhere good, miss. For either of us." "My name is Ayanna," she said quietly. "It means eternal blossom. And maybe you're wrong about paths." They reached the Apache stronghold 2 days later. It was hidden in a box canyon so well concealed that Ayanna would have walked right past it if Caleb hadn't known exactly where to look. Her people had been there for less than a week, but they had already begun to make the place feel like home. The reunion was emotional. Ayanna's grandmother, a tiny woman with steel-gray hair and eyes like black diamonds, embraced her granddaughter fiercely before turning her shrewd gaze on Caleb. "So," she said in accented English, "this is the mountain ghost who saved my granddaughter." Caleb removed his hat respectfully. "Ma'am." The old woman walked around him like she was evaluating a horse, taking in his weapons, his clothes, the way he held himself. Finally, she nodded approvingly. "You have honor," she pronounced. "Apache honor. This is rare in white men." That evening, the band held a feast in Caleb's honor. He was clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but he endured the speeches and songs with good grace. Ayanna watched him from across the fire, noting how the children were drawn to him, how even the warriors treated him with respect. He didn't belong here, but he wasn't entirely out of place either. After the feast, as the band settled down for the night, Ayanna walked to the edge of camp where Caleb sat alone, staring out at the desert stars. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "First light," he confirmed. "Your people are safe now. They don't need me hanging around. What if I asked you to stay?" Caleb was quiet for so long that Ayanna thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Asked myself the same question every night for the past week. But it wouldn't be fair to you. I'm a broken man, Ayanna. Been alone so long I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else." "Maybe being broken isn't permanent," she said softly. "Maybe some things can be healed." He turned to look at her then, and in his eyes she saw a longing so deep it took her breath away. But he shook his head sadly. "Some breaks go too deep to heal." Ayanna felt tears threatening, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she reached into her shirt and pulled out a small leather pouch that hung around her neck. "This is medicine," she said, placing it in his calloused palm. "Made by my grandmother's grandmother. Apache legend says it will keep a warrior safe in battle and guide him home when he's lost." Caleb stared down at the pouch, his thumb tracing the intricate beadwork. "I can't take this. It's too precious." "It's mine to give," Ayanna said firmly. "And I want you to have it." Caleb closed his fingers around the small pouch and nodded. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while, both of them knowing this was goodbye. Finally, Caleb stood. "Take care of yourself, Ayanna. You're a remarkable woman. Someday you'll find a man worthy of you." "I already did," she said quietly, but he was already walking away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the firelight. Caleb was gone when she woke the next morning. The only sign he had ever been there was a small pile of supplies: ammunition, coffee, and a note written in careful script. "For your people. May your path be smooth and your water always sweet. C.M." 2 months later. Ayanna was gathering pine nuts in the high country when she saw the smoke. Black and thick, rising from the direction of Millerville, a small settlement 2 valleys over. Apache rarely had business in Millerville, but something about that smoke made her uneasy. She made her way carefully toward the settlement, moving through the forest like her grandmother had taught her. As she got closer, she could hear gunfire, the rapid crack of rifles and the deeper boom of a shotgun. From a ridge overlooking the town, she could see what was happening. Morrison's gang was attacking Millerville, but this wasn't a raid for supplies or horses. This was personal. They were systematically destroying every building, shooting anyone who tried to flee. And there, in the middle of the main street, she saw a familiar figure making a desperate last stand. Caleb McKenna crouched behind an overturned wagon, his Sharps rifle speaking with deadly accuracy. Around him lay the bodies of at least 6 of Morrison's men, but he was clearly outnumbered. Blood stained his left shoulder, and his movements had the careful deliberation of a wounded man trying to conserve strength. Morrison himself stood at the far end of the street, safely behind his remaining men, shouting orders. "Take him alive. I want that mountain man to pay for what he did to my boys in the cave." Ayanna's heart clenched. Caleb was here because of her. Morrison had somehow tracked him down, seeking revenge for the humiliation in the mountains. And now the gentle mountain man who had saved her life was going to die because of it. Not if she had anything to say about it. Ayanna moved quickly back from the ridge, her mind racing. She was one woman against Morrison's remaining force, at least 8 men, maybe more. A frontal assault would be suicide. But Apache warriors had been fighting impossible odds for generations. Sometimes the key wasn't overwhelming force, it was being where your enemy didn't expect you. 20 minutes later, smoke began rising from the buildings on the north side of town. Smoke that had nothing to do with Morrison's rampage. Ayanna had used the old Apache trick of fire arrows, setting blazes at strategic points to create confusion and divide her enemy's attention. "Fire!" one of Morrison's men shouted. "The whole north side's going up." "Forget the fire," Morrison snarled. "Stay focused on McKenna." But his men were already wavering, looking nervously at the spreading flames. Fire was every frontier dweller's nightmare. It could consume an entire town in minutes if the wind was right. That's when Ayana struck. She came out of the smoke like an avenging spirit, her grandmother's rifle in her hands and her ancestors' war cry on her lips. She had painted her face with ash and ochre in the old style, and in the chaos and smoke, she looked more like a supernatural being than a mortal woman. Her first shot took down the man closest to Caleb's position. Her second scattered the group trying to flank him from the east. Suddenly Morrison's careful siege became a three-way battle, with enemies appearing from unexpected directions. Caleb, recognizing the distinctive sound of Apache war cries, immediately understood what was happening. He shifted his position, using the confusion to advance toward Morrison's main force. "It's that Apache bitch!" Morrison screamed, finally realizing who was attacking him. "Kill her! Kill them both!" But his men were demoralized and confused. Half of them were trying to fight the fires, the other half were spinning around trying to locate enemies who seemed to appear and disappear like ghosts. In the smoke and chaos, they were as likely to shoot each other as their intended targets. Ayana had learned guerrilla warfare from masters, Apache warriors who had held off the U.S. Army for decades using nothing but knowledge of the land and an intimate understanding of when to strike and when to fade away. She moved through the burning town like smoke itself, never staying in one place long enough for Morrison's men to get a clear shot. Meanwhile, Caleb advanced steadily through the chaos, his rifle accounting for two more of Morrison's gang. The outlaw leader found himself caught between two implacable enemies, his force melting away with each passing minute. "Fall back!" Morrison finally shouted. "We're getting out of here." But Ayana had anticipated this. While setting the fires, she had also stampeded Morrison's horses, driving them into a side canyon where they couldn't be easily reached. Morrison's retreat became a rout as his surviving men found themselves on foot in hostile territory. The battle ended almost as suddenly as it had begun. Morrison and two of his men managed to escape into the desert on foot, but the rest of his gang was either dead or wounded. The immediate threat was over. Ayana found Caleb sitting against the remains of what had been the general store, pressing a bandana against the wound in his shoulder. He looked up as she approached, his blue eyes wide with amazement. "Ayana, what in the hell are you doing here?" "Saving your life," she said matter-of-factly, kneeling beside him to examine his wound. "Again. This is becoming a habit. How did you—" "Never mind. We need to get out of here." Morrison got away, and he'll be back with more men. "Let him come," Ayana said grimly. "I'm tired of running from that Leechii." Caleb blinked. "Did you just call him a snake in Apache?" "Among other things." She helped him to his feet, noting that he was steadier than she had expected. "Can you ride? Do I have a choice?" They gathered what supplies they could from the burning town and appropriated 2 horses from Morrison's scattered remuda. As they rode out of Millerville, heading for the high country, Caleb finally asked the question that had been burning in him since she appeared. "Why? Why what? Why did you come after me? Why risk your life for a broken-down mountain man you barely know?" Ayana was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. Finally, she reined in her horse and turned to face him. "Because you're not as broken as you think you are," she said simply. "And because I love you." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they dared to cross. Caleb stared at her, his weathered face cycling through a dozen different emotions. "Ayana." "I know what you're going to say," she interrupted. "Apache woman, white man, no future together, all the reasons why it's impossible. But maybe I'm tired of listening to reasons why things can't work instead of reasons why they can." "It won't be easy," Caleb said quietly. "Nothing worthwhile ever is. People will talk. On both sides. Let them talk. I'm still broken inside. Still carrying ghosts. Then maybe it's time to let them rest." Ayana moved her horse closer to his. "I'm not asking you to forget your first family, Caleb. I'm asking you to consider the possibility of a second one." Caleb reached out and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "You sure about this? Once we ride off together, there's no going back. You'll be choosing a hard path." Ayana smiled, the expression transforming her face from beautiful to radiant. I chose my path the night you pulled me up from that ledge. Everything since then has just been working up the courage to walk it. 1 year later. The cabin sat in a hidden valley high in the mountains, surrounded by pine trees and wildflower meadows. It was small but well built, with a stone chimney and windows that caught the morning light. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and a small garden flourished behind the house, a blend of Apache medicinal plants and European vegetables that somehow seemed to thrive together in the mountain soil. Iana stood in the doorway, watching her husband work with the horses in the corral he had built beside the cabin. Caleb moved with the same quiet competence she remembered from their first meeting, but there was something different about him now, a peace that hadn't been there before, as if some long-held tension had finally released. He looked up and caught her watching him, flashing her the smile that still made her heart skip after all these months. The smile reached his eyes now in a way it never had during those first dangerous days. "Coffee's getting cold," she called. "Coming," he replied, giving the horse he'd been grooming a final pat before walking toward the cabin. As he approached, Iana noticed he was favoring his left leg slightly, an old injury from their encounter with Morrison's remaining men 6 months ago. The outlaw leader had made good on his threat to return, but this time Caleb and Iana had been ready for him. The final confrontation had taken place in the same canyon where they first met, and this time Morrison hadn't walked away. The limp was barely noticeable, and Caleb never complained about it, but Iana saw everything. It was part of her nature, the same instinct that had kept her alive in the desert now focused on caring for the man she loved. "How's Thunder's leg?" she asked as Caleb stepped onto the small porch. "Healing well. Should be able to ride him again in a few days." Caleb paused at the doorway, looking back at the spectacular view from their valley. "Still can't quite believe this is real sometimes." Iana moved to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What part?" "All of it. The peace. The home. You." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "Sometimes I wake up expecting to find myself back in that cave, alone again." "Well, you're not," Iana said firmly. "And you're not going to be." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching an eagle circle high overhead. In the distance, they could hear the sound of running water from the stream that provided for all their needs. It was a sound that had become as familiar as breathing, the soundtrack to their new life. "Iana," Caleb said suddenly, his voice carrying a strange note she couldn't quite identify. "Yes. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have mentioned before, but, well, it never seemed like the right time." She turned to face him fully, noting the tension that had suddenly appeared in his shoulders. "What is it?" Caleb ran his free hand through his hair, a gesture she had learned meant he was struggling with something difficult. "It's about Morrison. About what really happened that last time." Iana frowned. They had never talked in detail about that final confrontation. She knew Morrison was dead, Caleb had confirmed that much, but the specifics had remained unspoken between them, as if by mutual agreement. "He didn't come alone," Caleb continued. "Had 5 men with him, all professionals. Gunfighters, not the usual saddle tramps he'd been hiring." "I know. I saw them. What you didn't see was who hired them." Caleb's jaw tightened. Morrison had backing, Iana. Big backing. Territorial governor's office. Maybe higher. Men who saw Apache resistance as bad for business, bad for development. The implications hit her like a physical blow. "They wanted me dead." "They wanted you dead, and they wanted it to look like Morrison did it for personal reasons." Clean hands all around. Caleb's grip on her hand tightened. Morrison let it slip just before the end. Thought he was going to kill us both, so he decided to gloat a little. Iana was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. She had always known their enemies were more numerous and powerful than just one outlaw gang, but hearing it confirmed was still unsettling. "Is that why you've been so insistent about staying hidden?" she asked. "Why you won't let me visit my grandmother?" Caleb nodded grimly. "Those men are still out there, still in power. As far as they know, Morrison completed his mission and both of us died in that canyon. I want to keep it that way." For how long? I don't know. Until things change, I suppose. Until Arizona becomes a real state with real laws instead of territorial politics and backroom deals. Ayanna understood, but it didn't make the isolation any easier. She missed her family, missed the sound of her own language, missed the ceremonies and traditions that had shaped her since childhood. This hidden valley was beautiful, and their life here was peaceful, but it was also incomplete. There's something else, Caleb said, and now his voice carried a different note. Not tension, but anticipation. More bad news. No. Good news, I think. Or at least, news that might change things. He pulled a folded letter from his shirt pocket. Remember Jake Patterson? The Army scout I used to know. Ayanna nodded. Caleb had mentioned Patterson before, a man who had served as a liaison between the Army and various Apache bands during the worst of the conflicts. Got word from him through the trading post down at Cedar Creek. Presidents appointed a new territorial governor, man named Edmund Ross. Word is he's different from the others. Actually interested in peace with the Apache instead of extermination. Politicians say many things, Ayanna said carefully. They don't always mean them. True enough. But Jake says this Ross is the real thing. Already fired half the territorial administration, including some men we both know were connected to Morrison's operation. Ayanna felt a flutter of hope, quickly suppressed. She had learned to be cautious about hope where white politics were concerned. What does this mean for us? Maybe nothing. But maybe it means we don't have to hide forever. Maybe there's a chance for something better. Before Ayanna could respond, a sound echoed across the valley, a sound that made both of them freeze. It was a bird call, but not quite natural. Too precise, too deliberate. Apache signal. Caleb's hand moved instinctively to the rifle leaning beside the door, but Ayanna caught his wrist. Wait, she said. I know that call. She stepped to the edge of the porch and cupped her hands around her mouth, producing a series of trilling notes that seemed to blend naturally with the mountain sounds. The response came immediately, a different pattern, but one that made Ayanna's heart leap. My brother, she whispered. They emerged from the tree line like spirits materializing from the morning mist, 3 Apache warriors moving with the fluid grace of men who belonged to the mountains. But Ayanna only had eyes for the youngest of the 3, a tall young man whose face broke into a broad grin when he saw her. Shadizi, he called, using the Apache word for sister. Sheila, Ayanna replied, and then she was running across the meadow toward him. The reunion was emotional but brief. Apache culture didn't encourage prolonged displays of sentiment, and besides, the presence of the other 2 warriors suggested this wasn't purely a social visit. Ayanna's brother, whose Apache name was Dasani, he who speaks, introduced his companions with formal courtesy. Both were respected war leaders from different bands, men whose presence here suggested something significant was happening in the Apache world. We have been looking for you for many moons, Dasani said in Apache. The elders sent us to find you and bring word. What word? Ayanna asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. There will be a great council. All the bands, all the leaders. The white government sends a new man to speak with us, one who says he wants true peace, not the false peace of the reservation. Ayanna felt Caleb's presence behind her before she saw him. He had approached quietly, his rifle still in hand but not threatening. The 2 war leaders studied him with professional interest, taking in his weapons, his bearing, the way he moved. This is my husband, Ayanna said simply. If the warriors were surprised by this announcement, they hid it well. Apache culture was more flexible about such things than many white people assumed. Intermarriage had always been part of survival strategy, and a warrior was judged by his actions, not his ancestry. Dasani stepped forward and studied Caleb for a long moment. You are the mountain ghost, he said in English. The one who killed Black Jack Morrison. It wasn't a question. News traveled fast in Apache country, even to hidden valleys. I am, Caleb replied simply. Good, Dasani said with satisfaction. That Lechi killed many of our people. You have honor. The formal introduction complete, They moved to the cabin where Ayanna served coffee and the dried meat Caleb had been smoking. As they ate, the war leaders explained the situation in greater detail. The new territorial governor, Ross, had indeed dismissed many officials connected to the old corruption. More importantly, he had sent word through proper channels that he wanted to meet with Apache leaders, not to dictate terms, but to negotiate honestly for the first time in years. He asks for Tsayeda Helani specifically, one of the war leaders said, using Ayanna's Apache name. Why me? Because you have walked in both worlds. Because you understand the white man's ways but have not forgotten our ways. Because you are trusted by our people. Caleb was very quiet during this recitation, his weathered face giving nothing away. But Ayanna could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a fire. When? She asked. 1 month. The place will be announced when all have agreed to come. The warriors stayed only long enough to finish their meal and receive Ayanna's promise to consider their words. After they disappeared back into the forest as silently as they had come, Caleb and Ayanna sat on their porch in heavy silence. You have to go, Caleb said finally. We don't know that yet. I need to think. No, you don't. Caleb turned to face her, his blue eyes blazing with an intensity she hadn't seen since their early days together. This is what you were born for, Ayanna. This is why you survived Morrison, why you learned to move between worlds. Your people need you. And what about what I need? The words came out sharper than she had intended. What about our life here? What about us? Us. Caleb smiled, but it was a sad smile. Darling, there was never really going to be just U.S. You're too big for that, too important. I always knew this day would come. Ayanna felt tears threatening, a luxury she rarely allowed herself. So that's it? I go to this council and you go back to your cave. Maybe. Or maybe. Caleb paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Maybe it's time for this old mountain man to come down from the high country. Maybe there's still some use for me in the world below. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe I should come with you. Not to the council, that's Apache business, and I respect that. But maybe I should stop hiding from the world. Maybe it's time to see if this new governor really is different. The idea was so unexpected that Ayanna didn't know how to respond. In all their conversations about the future, Caleb had never suggested leaving their mountain sanctuary. You'd do that? For me. For us. For the chance that maybe we don't have to choose between love and duty. For the possibility that there might be a place in this changing world for an Apache woman and her mountain man husband. That night, they made love with a desperate passion that spoke of endings and beginnings, of fears faced and hopes embraced. Afterwards, as they lay entwined in their bed, Ayanna traced the scars on Caleb's chest, reminders of old battles and older pain. Are you afraid? She asked. Terrified, he admitted. But not of dying. I've been dying slowly up here for years, even before I met you. No, I'm afraid of living. Afraid of caring about something again. Afraid of having something to lose. But you're going to do it anyway. We're going to do it anyway, he corrected. Together. The council. The gathering took place in a hidden canyon in the Dragoon Mountains, a place sacred to the Apache and unknown to white men. Representatives from a dozen different bands had come, along with their most respected leaders and warriors. It was the largest Apache gathering in over a decade. Ayanna and Caleb had traveled separately for the last part of the journey. He waited in the foothills while she entered the canyon alone, as was proper. But she carried with her the knowledge that he was near, that whatever happened in the council, she wouldn't face the consequences alone. The council itself lasted 3 days. Territorial Governor Ross proved to be different from his predecessors, a small, quiet man who listened more than he spoke and who treated the Apache leaders with genuine respect. His proposals were more generous than anyone had expected. Recognition of Apache rights to traditional lands, compensation for past injustices, and most importantly, a promise that the Apache would be treated as sovereign allies rather than conquered enemies. But there were conditions. The Apache must agree to stop raiding, must help keep the peace in Apache territory, and must designate representatives who could work with the territorial government on ongoing issues. The debates were fierce. Some leaders wanted to reject any accommodation with the white government. Others argued that this might be their last chance for an honorable peace. The discussions went deep into the night, with voices raised in passion and frustration. On the final day, Ayanna was asked to speak. She rose slowly, feeling the weight of history on her shoulders. Around the council fire sat men who had fought the U.S. Army to a standstill, women who had kept their people alive through decades of war and privation. What could she say to such people? "My elders," she began, using the formal address, "I am young to speak in such company. But I have walked paths that some of you have not. I have lived among white men, learned their language, seen their cities. I have also lived in the old way, following the seasons, honoring the traditions our ancestors gave us." She paused, looking around the circle of weathered faces. "What I have learned is this: the world is changing. The buffalo are gone. The soldiers are many. We can fight these changes and die fighting them. Or we can find ways to change with the world while keeping what matters most: our people, our ways, our freedom to be Apache." An old war leader interrupted. "You speak of compromise with those who have broken every promise they ever made to us." "I speak of survival," Ayanna replied firmly. "I speak of our children having a future that is more than just war and hiding and death. This Governor Ross may be different. I believe he is. But even if he is not, even if this peace fails, we will be stronger for having tried. We will know more about our enemies. We will have bought time for our people to prepare for whatever comes next." The debate continued, but gradually opinion shifted. When the final vote was taken, the council agreed to Governor Ross's proposal by a narrow margin. As the gathering broke up and the various bands prepared to return to their territories, Ayanna's grandmother approached her. "You spoke well," the old woman said. "Your words carried wisdom beyond your years." "I hope so, Shima Sani. I hope I haven't led our people into a trap." Her grandmother studied her with those sharp black eyes. "You have changed, granddaughter. Marriage to the mountain man has given you something you didn't have before." "What's that?" "Hope. Real hope, not just the desperate kind that comes from having no other choice. Hope is dangerous. It can be destroyed, and the pain is terrible. But it's also the only thing that makes life worth living." New beginnings. 6 months after the council, Ayanna stood in the dusty main street of Tucson, watching workmen hang a new sign over what had once been a saloon. The sign read, "Apache Territory Liaison Office," in both English and Apache syllabary. It was her office. Governor Ross had kept his word. The Apache Treaty had been ratified, and Ayanna had been appointed as the official Apache representative to the territorial government. It was a position that had never existed before, one that required her to move between worlds on a daily basis, translating not just languages but entire ways of thinking. The work was difficult, often frustrating, and sometimes dangerous. Not everyone in Arizona Territory was happy with the new peace. There were ranchers who preferred the old system of shoot first and ask questions never, politicians who saw Apache autonomy as a threat to their power, and soldiers who resented being asked to keep peace instead of making war. But there were also allies. Governor Ross had surrounded himself with people who shared his vision of a different kind of frontier, one where cooperation replaced conquest. And increasingly, there were ordinary citizens, farmers, merchants, even some ranchers, who recognized that peace was better for business than constant warfare. Caleb emerged from the office, dust on his clothes and a satisfied expression on his weathered face. He had taken to his new role as Ayanna's unofficial deputy and bodyguard with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. More than that, he had proven to have an unexpected talent for diplomacy, perhaps because he understood both the Apache way of thinking and the fears of ordinary white settlers. "Furniture's all arranged," he reported. "You ready for your first official day as a government employee?" Ayanna smiled. "I've been ready for this my whole life. I just didn't know it." They walked together down the dusty street, past storefronts and saloons, past the hotel where territorial officials stayed when they visited Tucson. It was a strange life they had built, part of neither world, really, but somehow bridging both. They faced prejudice from both sides, Apache who thought she had sold out and whites who could never quite accept an Indian in a position of authority. But they also had something precious, a love that had been tested by fire and found strong enough to bear the weight of changing times. And perhaps more importantly, they had purpose. They were part of something larger than themselves, part of the slow, difficult work of building a better future. "Any regrets?" Caleb asked as they paused outside the office. Ayanna considered the question seriously. She thought of their hidden valley, of the peace and simplicity they had left behind. She thought of the dangers that lay ahead, the political battles, the risk that everything they were working for might fail. "None," she said finally. "This is where we belong, Caleb. Together, making a difference." He squeezed her hand. "Then let's get to work." As they entered the office together, ready to face whatever challenges the day might bring, neither of them noticed the figure watching from across the street. A man in a dusty coat and battered hat, his face hidden in shadow, his eyes fixed on the woman who had once been Morrison's target and was now something far more dangerous to certain interests, a symbol of change, a bridge between worlds, a living reminder that the old ways of handling the Apache problem were ending forever. The watcher melted back into the crowd, but his presence was a reminder that their real challenges were only beginning. Peace was more fragile than war, and there were always those who profited from conflict. But in the weeks and months that followed, as Apache and white children began to play together in the streets of border towns, as trade relationships developed between Apache bands and Mexican merchants, as the cycle of raid and reprisal slowly gave way to negotiation and compromise, it became clear that something fundamental had shifted. The Wild West was changing, and Ayanna and Caleb were part of that change. Living proof that love could bridge any divide, that courage could overcome any obstacle, and that even in the harshest land under the harshest circumstances, two people from different worlds could find common ground and build something beautiful together. Their story became legend in Apache memory and frontier folklore alike. The tale of the woman who could see in shadows and the mountain man who came down from the high country for love. But for Ayanna and Caleb, it was simply the beginning of their real adventure. The long, difficult, rewarding work of building a life together in a world they were helping to create. As Ayanna often told the children who came to hear her stories in later years, the most important journeys aren't the ones that take you away from home. They're the ones that help you discover where home really is. For her, home had never been a place. It was the man who had pulled her up from that ledge so many years ago, the partnership they had forged in fire and trial, and the hope they shared for a future where love could triumph over fear. The desert wind still carried the scent of sage, but now it also carried the sound of laughter, the voices of children learning two languages, the songs of a new world being born. And in that wind, those who listened carefully could sometimes hear an echo of ancient Apache songs, blending with mountain ballads, creating something entirely new, a music of hope, of healing, of home.